Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into the intense, often contradictory story of how the United States was forged. We're going to cover everything from the arrival of the first Europeans all the way to the nation's first great test of survival, the Civil War and what came after. Okay, let's start right here. Because honestly, everything that follows really kicks off with this one incredibly powerful idea. This wasn't just some declaration of war, you know? It was this radical, world-changing statement about human rights and the right to govern yourselves. You could even call it the nation's original mission statement. But here's the central problem, and this slide just lays it out perfectly. On one side, you've got that beautiful, inspiring ideal, and on the other, you have the brutal, hard reality. From the very, very beginning, these two things were just locked in this constant battle. And this wasn't an accident. So much of it was fueled by economics. The incredible wealth being generated in the colonies from crops like tobacco and cotton, well, it all depended on land taken from Native Americans and the forced labor of enslaved Africans. This clash, liberty for some but bondage for others, is what's going to define the next 2.5 centuries of American history. Right? So this tension, it wasn't just some minor detail. It was literally baked into the DNA of the colonies. You have all these people coming to North America looking for freedom for themselves, but the very societies they built were founded on systems of profound unfreedom. I mean, just think about it for a second. Jamestown, that was a business venture, plain and simple, all about making a profit. Plymouth was a religious refuge, so both groups were chasing their own kind of independence, right? Their own right to self-determination. But at the same time, Jamestown's hunger for profit created this huge demand for cheap labor, a demand that was soon met by a system of permanent race-based slavery. So as this new independent spirit was growing, so was the total reliance on enslaved labor, and these violent conflicts with native peoples, like King Philip's War, which practically destroyed the Wampanoag people, the very same people who'd helped the Pilgrims survive in the first place. So, how in the world did these colonists, who really saw themselves as loyal English subjects, turn into full-blown revolutionaries? Well, that switch got flipped surprisingly fast, and it all boiled down to a fundamental disagreement over power and rights. Look, after helping the colonists win the French and Indian War, Britain was deep in debt and figured, hey, it's only fair the colonies help pay for it. So they started passing new taxes, like the Stamp Act. But for the colonists, this was never really about the money. It was about the principle of taxation without representation. And as you can see here, things just spiraled out of control. It went from protests to events like the Boston Massacre, which then led to Britain cracking down even harder with the Intolerable Acts. And that was the final push the colonies needed to declare a total break. Now, winning the war was going to take more than just revolutionary spirit. It was going to take some powerful friends. The victory at Saratoga was huge because it proved to the world, and more importantly to Britain's old rival France, that the Americans might actually pull this thing off. That alliance was an absolute game changer. But then, after the war, the challenge just shifted. Their first crack at a government, the Articles of Confederation, was, well, it was just way too weak. It led to chaos, really, with stoats squabbling and the central government pretty much powerless to do anything. So the founders went back to the drawing board and they came up with this, the Constitution. And it was a truly revolutionary document. It created a strong federal government, but one with all these built-in limits on its power through checks and balances. It was just an incredible piece of political engineering. But, and this is a huge but, to get all the states to agree to it, they made a fatal compromise. They decided to just kick the can down the road on the issue of slavery. And that, can they kicked down the road? Well, it was about to explode. As the young nation started pushing westward, that unavoidable central question of slavery was about to dominate every single debate over the country's future. This idea of manifest destiny, it was an incredibly powerful force. It's what drove settlers west, it led to horrific policies like the Indian Removal Act and the Trail of Tears, and it even sparked a war with Mexico. But here's the thing. With every single new square mile of territory the U.S. acquired, from the Louisiana Purchase to California, one question hung over everything in Congress. Would it become a free state or a slave state? What's so fascinating about this slide is you can just visualize the desperation. You can literally see Congress trying to stitch the country together with these political band-aids. First, the Missouri Compromise, then the Compromise of 1850. But each one was just a temporary fix that basically made the next crisis even worse. And it all came to a head with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which led to actual warfare between pro- and anti-slavery settlers in what became known as Bleeding Kansas. And this This was the moment the political debate basically turned into a holy war. To the South, John Brown was a terrorist who proved all their worst fears were true. But to many abolitionists in the North, he was a martyr for the cause of freedom. After Harper's Ferry, there was just no middle ground left. None. The absolute breaking point came just a year later, with the election of 1860. The second that Abraham Lincoln won the presidency on a platform of stopping the expansion of slavery, the South saw it as a direct threat to their entire society and way of life. South Carolina went first, and pretty soon 11 states had left the Union to form the Confederacy. They argued it was their constitutional right to leave. Lincoln and the North argued it was an illegal rebellion. That standoff ended when Confederate cannons opened fire on Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor. And just like that, the war was on. The cost, it was just unimaginable. This one number on the screen represents a level of death and carnage that just shattered the nation. This was a brutal, industrial-scale war that pitted Americans against each other, brother against brother, in a way nobody could have possibly foreseen. The tide really turned in the summer of 1863. Over in the East, the Confederate invasion was stopped dead in its tracks at Gettysburg. Out west, General Grant captured the vital city of Vicksburg, basically cutting the Confederacy in two. And crucially, Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation had transformed the whole purpose of the conflict. It wasn't just a war to save the Union anymore, it was now a war to end slavery. Okay, so here's the crucial point. The end of the war in 1865 settled two enormous questions. First, states could not just leave the Union. And second, slavery was dead. But it opened up an even bigger, more complicated question. What did freedom and equality actually mean for 4 million newly freed African Americans? And this slide, it just perfectly illustrates the radical attempt to answer that question. Think about this. In just 5 years, the Constitution was fundamentally rewritten. These 3 amendments, the Reconstruction Amendments, were a revolution all by themselves. The goal was to build a brand new biracial democracy on the ashes of the old slave-holding republic. But this whole revolutionary period came to a screeching halt. The presidential election of 1876 was so chaotic and contested that it threw the entire country into crisis. So, to solve it, the political parties struck a secret backroom deal. The Republicans got to keep the White House, and in exchange, they agreed to pull the last of the federal troops out of the South. And once those troops were gone, so was any federal protection for the civil rights of African Americans. Southern states moved fast to impose a new system of racial oppression called Jim Crow, this whole network of laws enforcing segregation and systematically denying black citizens the right to vote. It basically nullified the promises of the 14th and 15th Amendments. The nation was back together, but its founding contradiction was still completely unresolved. And that, right there, is really the big takeaway from this entire period. The forging of the United States was this constant, relentless battle between its highest ideals and its harshest realities. The Civil War and Reconstruction brought that conflict to a bloody climax, but they didn't end it. The debate over who gets to be included in We the People and what equality truly means, well, that's a struggle that was born with the nation itself, and it's one that absolutely continues to this day.